Hello, my name is Russell Myers. Welcome to Issues Unite. The Ukrainian-Donbass city of Avdiivka has fallen. The Ukrainians have withdrawn completely from the city, and the amount of cope and propaganda coming from Ukraine and the Western media is just, it's hilarious, actually. So let me get to the distraction to keep that's being pushed forward about to keep you from paying attention to this, is that Alexei Navalny, an opposition politician to Vladimir Putin, that has been imprisoned for some time. He died. The apparent cause, we're saying sudden death syndrome. This was caused apparently by a blood clot. Now, he was 47 years old. I don't know what kind of health he was in, or, what health, if he had any chronic health conditions. But at 47 years old, a blood clot, DVT, is not really that uncommon. From sitting too much in prison, in transport. I've known a nurse that worked from home, and she wound up with a DVT. A DVT is genuinely, extremely dangerous. The blood clot forms in your leg, and that blood clot can break off and go up to your lung, obstructing, causing what's called a pulmonary embolism, and you can die. I've seen people die from this as a nurse. You can die within 2 minutes, and there is absolutely nothing that can be done about it. Okay? Once that happens, you cannot save that person, period. Now, not all pulmonary embolisms result in immediate death. It depends on the size of the blood clot, where exactly the blood clot goes, a number of factors. But, there are reasons that in hospitals we assess for and try to prevent DVTs from happening. So, this souns completely reasonable. He was moved to an Arctic prison in December, and you are more prone to blood clots in colder weather. So this sounds like a reasonable scenario. But so the Western media is focusing on this. Funny how they don't mention, Julian Assange. They don't mention Gonzalo Lira, who died in a Ukrainian prison. They don't talk about that. They don't talk about, Assange being psychologically tortured since 2012, 14 years. But Alexei Navalny, who was genuinely, not just once, he was convicted multiple times. And in one case, he was not supposed to leave the country, but he did. And that was when he was allegedly poisoned with the most potent poison that has ever been contrived, and yet he survived with absolutely no subsequent problems. All right, so let's get back to Avdiivka. All right. There are all kinds of excuses being made. First of all, the Ukrainian government is saying that this was an intentional withdrawal. But no, for 2 or 3 days before the order to retreat was given, there were units, Ukrainian units, that were just abandoning their positions, leaving their weapons behind, leaving the stores of ammunition, which discounts the whole idea, well, we need to send them more weapons. Let's remember that at the beginning, as far as the weapons, the Ukrainian military at the beginning of this conflict was the largest single state militia in all of Western Europe, bar none. They had an air force, they had anti-aircraft. Now, most of this was old Soviet equipment. As far as they didn't have any real military production except for replicating old Soviet equipment. Yet, Ukrainians had been trained by NATO since 2014. They had been given weapons. Ukraine had gotten, funding from the United States since 2014, ever since the neo-Nazi overthrow of the democratically elected government. So, they had weapons, and yet, along the front line, at least along in eastern Ukraine, one of the things that enabled the Russians to take Avdiivka was a complete air superiority, not supremacy. Supremacy would mean that they can just fly over with absolutely no threat at all, but absolute air superiority. They had dropped at least 500 FAB bombs, which are gliding bombs, guided glide bombs, and they're highly effective and relatively low cost compared to guided missiles. All right, so the West had sent, tanks and armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, anti-aircraft, air defense systems, radars, millions upon millions of rounds of small arms ammunition and small arms, hundreds of thousands of shells, artillery shells. At one point, Ukraine had drone superiority. They've had the Starlink system provided by Elon Musk. And yet, the Russians managed to completely black out Starlink over Avdiivka, throughout Avdiivka, which disrupted the communication and coordination of units on the ground there. But they had no backup system. There was no backup communication system. So this was a big thing. One of the things that they're saying now is Avdiivka was insignificant. No, absolutely not. Avdiivka has been the most militarily fortified city on the face of the planet for 10 years, ever since Ukraine invaded Donbass took over Avdiivka and occupied it, fortified it. This was the most fortified city anywhere at all. And this was where Ukraine had been bombing the city of Donetsk for the past 10 years. Another excuse that they're using is that the Russians were lucky and found this pipeline that led into part of the city. But again, the Ukrainians, and they'll say, well, it was built by the Russians. Actually, that pipeline was built while Ukraine was a Soviet Ukrainian state. So literally, the Ukrainians built that pipeline. And they've occupied the city for 10 years, but they didn't know about it. And that the Russians took over one area. This was a pretty long pipeline. They took over one area, which contained one end of the pipeline, and they sent 150 soldiers through the pipeline and took over an area which effectively split off a significant part of Avdiivka, weakening the defense. But most of this came from the air superiority. There's all this talk about, Russia lost 100,000 troops. There were only 40,000 troops involved in the storming of Avdiivka. Yes, they did lose a lot of people and a lot of equipment in this battle, which has been going on for a few months now, but nowhere near 100,000. Anyway, again, the Ukrainian soldiers began evacuating without orders. This resulted also in friendly fire incidents. While the Russians were shelling the evacuation route, the Ukrainians were also shelling the evacuation route, and reports say about 1,500 soldiers that were evacuating have been killed along the evacuation route. So it was a friendly fire incident. This is understandable with no orders coming from above to evacuate. The Ukrainians further to the west didn't know who the forces were that were coming straight at them. So they started firing. They had no way of knowing who they were firing at. So that's another thing. So what happens from here? The Russians are not taking a pause after this. They're rotating out troops that are tired from the battle, but they've got troops to rotate out. Meanwhile, so they're continuing to push westward. I don't expect this push to be an all-out push and running across all of Ukraine at this time of year. And what they're really doing is waging an attritional conflict. And this is mostly what Russia has been doing from the beginning. This has been a war of attrition. So they're pushing further west. They're also amassing troops, more troops, to take Robotna back and along that area. There they've got about 60,000 troops. But you're not going to see a big wave happening across that region at this time because it's too muddy. This has been a big problem for the Ukrainians, that many of their vehicles trying to get there or out of Avdiivka have gotten stuck in the mud because this time of year is extremely rainy and the whole area has mud that can go tens of meters deep. And heavy equipment cannot operate. Even wheeled vehicles on dirt roads are just getting stuck. Entire convoys are getting stuck. So the only thing that the Russians are going to try and take are small settlements that are further to the west of Avdiivka and areas that they can take with infantry at this time. Anyway, so if the Russians are going to make a significant move westward, I don't expect it to be until spring, which will be April or May. Until then, they're going to take a few small settlements and try to reach probably the next line of defense that the Ukrainians have built up. That's a few kilometers to the west, and continue waging a battle of attrition from now until then. But they have significantly increased their air superiority and attacks using glide bombs. They now are far superior in at least number, but in some cases technology for drone warfare over Ukraine. I really think that Ukraine needs to come to the negotiating table. I've been saying this for a long time. I've said this from the very beginning, that Ukraine needs to come to the negotiating table and negotiate in good faith. But I do not expect that to happen while Zelensky remains in office. His term of office is supposed to officially end at the end of March. But elections have been suspended. Martial law is in effect. They are continuing to forcibly conscript people, but you can find lots of videos online of people fighting against the recruiters that grab them off the street and throw them into vans to send them to the front line with little or no training. There's lots of reports about this coming from Ukraine about this happening. Many Ukrainian soldiers have said they received no training. They never fired a gun in their life, and yet they're handed a weapon and sent to the front. They don't know how to operate any of the equipment. They don't know how to drive a tank. They don't know how to fire a weapon. They don't know how to clean a weapon. If a weapon jams, they have no idea what to do. And there have been reports of one brigade. This came from a Ukrainian unit. One brigade was sent in, and 70% of that brigade were medically disabled. They had chronic health issues, and they were medically disabled. This didn't come from Russian propaganda. This came from another Ukrainian brigade that stated this, that they were rotated out to be sent to Avdiivka. I think this was in the Lysychansk, Kramatorsk area. So this new brigade comes in, 70% disabled, so that this brigade could be redeployed to Avdiivka. You are just seeing lots and lots of people fighting back against being forcibly recruited. That this tells you the fact that they have to forcibly recruit people, and they're trying to recruit 500,000 people, tells you they've lost a lot of soldiers. You don't try to draw up 500,000 people unless you've already lost that many. It's time to come to the negotiating table. It's time to talk. Remember, Zelensky made it illegal to engage in peace talks. The Biden administration cut off communications with the Russians. So the hope of this ending with peace talks at this time are pretty much zero. There's basically no chance of that. So expect to see the Russians continue to move westward and wait until spring. And there are no fortifications to the west that can compete with the level of fortification that the Ukrainians have had in Avdiivka or Bakhmut or Soledar or Mariupol. The Ukrainians have lost all of these major fortifications in the Donbass region since this began. There's really any fortifications that exist at this point going from Avdiivka over to the city of Dnipro and starts with a Z. Hold on. Sorry, I had to remind myself. Zaporozhye, until they reach the Dnieper River and those cities. Any fortifications to the west at this point are merely speed bumps. It's time. There's rising discontent in western Ukraine for this battle. There's rising discontent in Europe against them being in recession and yet giving all this money and all this stuff to Ukraine and weakening their own defense. There's rising discontent and lack of support in the United States for this conflict. It is time for this to end. It is time for people to stop dying. And the Russian concerns for their security need to be heard. The Russian concerns for the human rights of the people in the Donbass region need to be heard. Is that going to happen? Probably not. So it's just going to have to continue in the way that it's been going, which means more debt for the West, a weakened defense for the West, and Russia is still expanding their military capacity, even as we speak. All right. Share this video. Talk about these subjects. If you can afford it, please donate whatever you can to help expand this channel and my presidential campaign. And I will catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a good day.